Welcome everyone to the Artist to Storyteller Speaker Series. My name is Steph Hankinson. I'm Humanities and Drama faculty at South Seattle College, and it's my great pleasure to introduce our moderators for today's conversation with photographer Binh Danh. So today's Memorial Day. It's also the last day of AAPI History Month, which stands for Asian American and Pacific Islander History Month. And it's the perfect day to talk with Binh Danh about his passion for creating images about histories, identities, and place. And so today we're going to learn about Danh's unique photographic process and reflect together on the role of memories and the trauma of diasporic experiences in visual storytelling. But before I introduce Amiko, Chow, and Ben, I'd like to offer a land acknowledgement to set our intention and our energy before we become immersed in the conversation. We would like to acknowledge that the Artist to Storyteller project is located in West Seattle, the traditional land of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people past and present. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe. Members of our team were born and raised on the traditional lands of the Suquamish, S'Klallam, Chumash, Tongva, Shawnee, and Kickapoo tribes, and we would like to honor the stewardship of these indigenous peoples whose land and stories we now have the privilege of having been shaped by. Thank you. So a little bit about the Artist to Storyteller series for those of you who are joining us for the first time. The Artist to Storyteller Speaker Series was fueled by the desire to put BIPOC artists, performers, and activists directly into conversation with students and the community to create new space for human connection and celebrate creativity in all its forms. Our first season has explored adaptation, resiliency, and environmental justice in the time of COVID-19. And I'd like to welcome our student moderator, Chow Luong. Chow has been a student at South Seattle College for 3 years. She's working to finish her final quarter at South and will transfer to the University of Washington, Tacoma to pursue a bachelor's degree in accounting this fall. She loves Vietnamese opera, Vietnamese country music, and all different kinds of music from around the world. She's trained as an opera singer in Vietnam before moving to the US. And since moving to the US, Chow has performed in the Seattle and Portland areas. She's now living on Vashon Island and plans to pursue a career in accounting or to open a Vietnamese restaurant on the island. Chow, welcome, hello.
Hello. Thank you, Steph.
Thank you. Our faculty co-moderator is Amiko Matsuo. Amiko is an artist and an educator whose work focuses on transmigration, cultural exchange, and translation. Her most recent installations explore place, identity, and materiality in the fire-prone landscapes of the Anthropocene using ceramics, ash, and Phos-Chek flame retardant. Hi, Amiko.
Hello, everyone. So nice to see you all.
Yeah. And then finally, I'd love to introduce our wonderful guest artist, Binh Danh. Binh Danh reconfigures traditional photographic techniques and processes in unconventional ways to delve into the connection between history, identity, and place. As a child who immigrated to the US from war-torn Vietnam in 1979, the memories and trauma of his diasporic experiences serve as the foundation for his investigative practice. In his highly acclaimed series of chlorophyll prints, Danh uses photosynthesis to print portraits from the Vietnam War era directly onto the surface of leaves. Danh is also noted for his contemporary daguerreotypes of national parks. And you'll have to explain what daguerreotypes are because I am, as you can tell, I do not know. And their reflective surfaces enable people of all backgrounds to see themselves as part of the beauty of the American landscape. So Ben, welcome. I'm so thrilled that you're here today. and that, you know, we've set aside this sort of moment to have this conversation on what feels like a really auspicious intersection of days and months to celebrate, you know, what we celebrated on Memorial Day and in this month. So thanks for being here today. I'm totally excited to hear about the way you layer history and place and stories in your art, and I can't wait to hear more.
Well, thank you, Steph, and thank you, Miko and Xiao. It's an honor to be here. And yeah, it happens to be that today's Memorial Day. And I do find my work does focus on a lot of issues about remembering and memorial itself in many complicated layers. So I would like to also start by acknowledging that I'm actually zooming in from Gilroy, California, known as the garlic capital. But before it was known as the garlic capital, it was the first inhabitant of the first inhabitant of the greater Gilroy area, are often referred to as the Lonely Indians. And you know, their lives were tragically altered by the late 1700 arrivals of the Spanish missionaries and their military units. So the history of the land and where I place my tripod has deep meaning for me. So I guess I'll just first start with sharing my slides with you. So I'm gonna switch over to screen sharing now, and definitely, whoops, let me actually try that again, making sure I have the right screen, and definitely give me a thumbs up. Do you see my slides? Okay, great. Thank you, you all. Okay, so so yeah, I always want to start out with this photograph of my mother, and I found this picture in our family album when I was like in about like college age. I was just again being nosy and looking through those pictures, right? And of course, going through black and white pictures of you know my especially my parents' past was such a mystery for me. So I found this picture and I asked my mother, like, what is this picture about? You know, and she explained to me that this photograph was made because at the time she, you know, around 16 to 17 years old, she was a single lady. And it was through this photograph that my parents' marriage was arranged. And so the translation on the upper right-hand corner means a lonely person on a boat. So it has the idea that, you know, again, she was single, she was lonely, and she needs to be wed away. And I find it so magical, again, that my parents met through kind of like a photograph, and how photography has become so much part of my life and the way I process the world in the photographic process. And little did she know that the man that she was going to marry will one day take the family on a boat to leave Vietnam after the Vietnam War. And we ended up in, of course, here in the US. So this next slide, it's some more family photograph. And when I went back to Vietnam for the first time, my grandmother gave me this picture of my family, made the black and white picture on the left that was made before we left Vietnam. And again, I was amazed to see a picture of my family in Vietnam because I've never seen one before. And I'm the youngest of 4 kids, and I'm the baby there in my mother's arm. And somehow this picture kind of looks like really familiar in ways. And it wasn't until I went back to the States that I was looking through the album again. I came across another family photograph, the one on the right, the color picture of us at the Japanese tea garden. And when you look at the 2 pictures side by side, they're quite amazingly similar. It's quite, you know, kind of, even the picture on the black and white picture is a backdrop, but that backdrop kind of represent that backdrop in the US, the kind of the real physical space. And for me, it kind of just makes me think about like, the purpose of like backdrop photography is a way to like imagine yourself somewhere else. And so in this case, like we're imagining ourselves somewhere else, which happens to be the same background is the one at the Japanese tea garden in San Jose, California. So just a little bit more of kind of biography and growing up as a Vietnamese American. This slide here kind of depicts kind of two more stories. One is growing up and working at my father's TV repair business. And to pass the time, I actually really gravitated and watched Vietnam War movies. And it's something for me to kind of process and think about. And I knew because of the Vietnam War, my family's now living in the US, but my parents never really explained it to me. It was kind of explained through Hollywood. And it also kind of makes me think about like why I'm so interested in landscape photography. And I think it happens to be because of watching pictures and imageries of the Vietnam War, thinking about landscape, thinking about that sort of jungle, visual, basically visual storytelling that happens in talking about the Vietnam War. And then I always wanted to go camping as a kid, and my parents never understand why would anybody want to go out into the woods. It's like, and they always kind of associate the word camp to refugee camp, and it was like something we did. We went out into the wilderness and we tried to survive for 9 months, in the elements. So it wasn't until in the 5th grade I actually got a chance to go camping on a school field trip, and I was so excited about it because I knew that camping was something like the most American thing to do. And of course, growing up as a kid, I always want to be like any American kid, right? I'll go to my best friend's house and we'll see pictures of them like on the refrigerators or on the wall of them out camping, doing these wilderness thing. So on this trip, my first camping trip, my father bought me my first camera. So it was a kind of a point and shoot camera. It came in a kit with like a roll of film in the case. And so I still have this photo album today. And whenever time I look at these pictures, I'm kind of like projected back into the past, into this moment. So I always find photography really amazing that it allow us to kind of relive the past, but our own pictures that we made, we kind of relive that moment that we made those pictures in. So moving on, when I became a college student, of course, I majored in art and I was focusing on photography. And in 1999, I went to Vietnam for the first time to meet my grandparents, but also just to really visit Vietnam and think about Vietnam as a country and not a war. And of course, I was really amazed by just being there, the smell, thinking about, it's a place where I was born, but I, of course, have no memories of it at all. I was way too young. I was about, just 1 year old when we left. But it's a place where my parents spent, most of their, well, at least half of their life in Vietnam, and their understanding of their war's view is based on this, upbringing that they had growing up in Vietnam. So I traveled the country and just photographed with my my Mamiya 7 camera. It's a rangefinder camera, and like a picture like this, I was amazed. Like in this rice paddy, the cemeteries and the rice paddies are like in the same place, and like you eat the rice where your ancestors buried, and I find that so magical that continuation of life, the cycle of life, kind of comes into play. And of course, there's in Vietnam, there's a lot of remnants of the war, and some of these remnants are collected in a museum, and they're known as War Remnants Museum, as well as you could be like in a coffee plantation and see like a tank that was left from the war sitting there as an object or as a relic. So like in this picture here at the War Remnants Museum in Ho Chi Minh City, this is an installation of a 35 millimeter camera where the bullet went through the camera and struck the photojournalist photographer there. So I was, again, always reminded that the war happened in this soil, in this land. And when I came back to the US, I wanted to address that idea somehow. So I was just standing in my mother's garden and I just kind of was looking at her plants, you know, her leaves and the stuff that she grow, and just imagining like, you know, is it possible to put like a picture on it, right? So through trial and error, I developed this body of work called Immortality, the Remnants of the Vietnam and American War. And of course, I call it the American War because in Vietnam, they call it the American War, while here we call it the Vietnam War. And I wanted to find basically a commonality between the North and South armies who were fighting, the Americans who were, you know, fighting, helping out the South Vietnam, the civilians who were in the way, not in the way, but the civilians who were trying to live their lives, who happened to be in the way and obviously sometimes got killed too because of that. So the commonality of all that was that the war was just destruction and death, all around you. So when I was, of course, in Vietnam, I was confronted by the subtle and physical remnants of war. And then using the pictures I found in Life magazines, as well as other sort of archives, I printed the image onto leaves by the process of photosynthesis, a photographic technique I call chlorophyll printing. And I thought, what if the plants could witness these horrific events? You know, what would they remember and what would they say? So this project is about, basically it's really about that the war, even though we understand the war ended in a way, but it never truly ended. It always lived within the landscape. And you know, I always talk about elements. You know, when I was in elementary school, I learned that everything was made of atoms, right? And the atoms are composed, I mean, everything in the universe is composed of atoms. And these atoms, they just get kind of like recycle back into the universe, back into the cosmos, and become other things. And like every atoms in our bodies, you know, which is billions and billions, zillions of atoms, are once part of other stories in history, and are once part of the Vietnam War, or was once part of the Civil War. You know, that it like, you know, if we could take like an atom and put it into some sort of instrument, and we could look at the layers and layers of history that atom holds, you know, I think that would be remarkable. And talking about how, you know, we're all sort of connected through the elements. You know, and you can also think about the issue of Agent Orange in Vietnam. You know, Agent Orange was a herbicide used during the Vietnam War to clear out the jungle, so the enemy couldn't hide. And an Agent Orange contained this compound called dioxin. And so this, again, this is an arrangement of atoms into a compound called dioxin that causes a lot of birth defects in the life form. So when I was growing up, I would come across photographs of kids in newspapers with like deformed limbs or missing limbs, and I would ask my mother like what happened to them, and she would mention that they have the orange disease. And it seems like they went to war and came back to war with missing limbs, but in actuality, like the war was born inside of them. This is quite a very iconic image of the Vietnam War, from the Vietnam War, where a Buddhist monk set himself on fire. So, you know, you think about all the ash and the smoke that's coming out, and how that just becomes part of the environment, you know. So yeah, so this is, and the work is then, the leaf after I print it, I dry it, and then I cast it in resin. And the resin kind of acts like a specimen. So the work could be then exhibited, in a gallery. I'll just quickly show you some other work, and I'll try to again stay on topics so I don't run out of time. But in 2002, my mother and I went to an island called Pulau, the site of an abandoned refugee, Southeast Asian refugee camp where we once lived. And this picture depicts refugees after being rescued and arriving to Pulau Island. And this is the island well, not today, but 2,000 years ago. I mean, the island is almost like 10 years ago, actually. Is that right? Yeah, 2002 is 20 years ago. Got it. Well, yeah, times fly. But this was the island then, and traveling with my mother was kind of quite an amazing experience. And she had the memories of being on the island. Again, I was only a baby, and just being on the island allowed us to even remember more. And she would tell us like how we survived. So this is a picture I actually wanted to make of her holding this immigration documents that allow us entrance into the US. I thought this is the only sort of conceptual photograph I was thinking about. But other than that, we kind of just roamed the island, and we came across like just remnants of a community. For example, this is was once a boat that carries refugees onto the island. And this is like, there's a lot of drawings, a lot of also sort of, people draw and wrote their names. Other visitor who came through and just want to see what was there. Like this was a Catholic church that was set up on the island, and then walking into this building was kind of haunting because this like Christ figure has like falling off the cross. It seems like some sort of like resurrection. Is it time to start again? Time to start a new life. And then while people were waiting on the island, a lot of mythological stories and legends were also created. And one was about a spirit named Father Pidon who saved people from drowning. So there's this monument dedicated to this figure, and these plaques from families that say, thanks to old Father Pidon. So there's an image of a statue of him kind of pulling this woman out of the ocean. So I find that really magical too, that there's again this guiding spirit that kind of is taking you and helping you along your journey, as basically displaced people. And then one of the amazing moments for us was when we found these letters and documents and governmental records, and some were scattered in buildings and other were just kind of left on the floor of the forest here, or the jungle in ways. And these are people's testimony. A lot of them are testimony, which are just people's letters to the governmental official who's going to process their application. Why they escaped, why they left Vietnam, so they could be their status of they could be appointed refugee status. Others were just documents and census. And for example, here is what's called a boat sheet. And a boat sheet is a census of the number of people on a boat when the boat was rescued. So on this sheet here, somebody wrote 22 people die on the sea by Thai, which means 22 people were basically murdered by Thai pirates. And there was only one survivor. And you can see, the first line there, number 1, Tran Chi Chong, who was date of birth 1971 and designated occupation as a student. And this boat was found on November 3rd, 1986 at 3 a.m. in the morning. So it was stories like that really kind of hits me, stories like that kind of are left in the forest and waiting to be told. So I scanned these documents in and thinking about where the information went, And then using the chlorophyll printing process, I printed the words and voices of these refugees onto leaves to suggest that the landscape itself is going to be holding on to their stories. Moving on, this is a project I did in Lincoln, Nebraska. I was invited out there to collaborate with the Vietnamese American community. And it was a wonderful exhibit. I had an exhibit at the end of the collaboration. I was seeing a portrait. I wanted to make portraits of Vietnamese Americans, and coming from California, I'm always amazed that there's other Vietnamese American community out there. And of course, I shouldn't be surprised because Vietnamese American, populated the United States, from not just in California, but in all over up to Alaska. And that's how much we are able to adapt, just to renew, to begin again, in ways. So I was fascinated with that. I photographed people from many different generation and occupation, like a college student, a priest, and a social worker. And so I saw this project as a big self-portrait of the Vietnamese American community. For example, here, this is the Buddhist community of Lincoln, and how they took this like American craftsman house and convert that into a Buddhist temple, this very traditional American style house. And this is the larger Vietnamese Buddhist temple out there. And I was amazed to see something this large out there in this very flat landscape, I also focus on businesses, which are, they're the one who kind of are the front of the community that they face, they face the other community, as well as, college students who really helped me a lot on this project. And this is a sorority group called Sigma Psi Zeta, and they were setting up their invasion annual fundraiser, a tongue-in-cheek on the word invasion, which is, kind of reminds me of the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, or some of the immigration policy that our country enacted in recent years. So when I was there, I always was looking at historical photographs of Lincoln, Nebraska, and the surrounding area of Lincoln. I came across the work of a photographer named Solomon D. Butcher, and here he was photographing families from the Homestead Act, and family will just come out in front of their homes and kind of like pose for him. So I kind of appropriated the same sort of composition and photographed Vietnamese American in front of their homes. And I asked them to come out and just pose in front of their house. And then with the help of the student groups at the university, we also collected photographs from the community, and we made this large collage, which is now in the collection of the Sheldon Art Museum. And it's wonderful because during the opening, the community show up for it, and they were so happy and surprised to just see themselves like in this museum. This is the first time they felt like visible, like they could see themselves, and they their friends came out too and saw them. And so it's about visibility, something I was definitely after in this project. Another project I want to share with you is it's a project called San La, which in Vietnamese means green leaves. But the way I kind of phrase it here, it looks like it's like a fictional place in Louisiana. And I was invited by the Louisiana State Museum to collaborate with the Vietnamese American community out there. So I was focusing on the eastern part of New Orleans, where majority of the Vietnamese community live. And when I went to visit them, I was really amazed by their gardens. I think a lot of Vietnamese American, we have green thumbs. We plant a lot, we grow, and a lot of it is, is for food and things like that. So I went around and started to photograph people in their gardens. and thinking about like how the things they're growing are kind of like tropical fruits and tropical plants, and how it's changing the landscape of New Orleans, of the surrounding areas, and bringing in also, in a way, smuggling some seeds in from Vietnam, and sprouting new plants in the area. So it's obviously very complicated, but it's again just the thought about making the land to something that's more familiar for you. And of course, this next slide here is just some the surrounding news in the area. About the friction between other communities and Vietnamese American communities, based on white supremacies, and of course the Gulf states and things like that, the fishing industry. So I'm going to move on. I know I'm a little bit going to run out of time, but I'm going to just quickly move on just to show you kind of what I'm working on right now with this project about photographing the national parks and using the daguerreotype process. And the daguerreotype is a 19th century process, and was invented by a Frenchman named Louis Daguerre, who was the first photographic process ever, and I have been using it in my work to photograph the national park, and thinking about how the process itself, because it's highly reflective, you can see yourself in the image. So you see yourself at these national parks location, and thinking about your relationship to this country. So I've been traveling a lot. These are from Yosemite National Park, as well as Joshua Tree, which is in California, Death Valley, and then of course getting out to Utah, photographing Arches National Park. This is a MANZANAR National Historical Site, and as most of you know, MANZANAR was a place where Japanese and Japanese Americans were taken during World War II to be interned. So I visited that place several times, thinking about the history of that land. And this in this slide here, I borrow a title from Terry Tempest Williams' book called The Open Space of Democracy, thinking about how we could shape our democracy by looking at these open spaces. So this is a ceremony where the park ranger were blessed in this Buddhist ceremony at MANZANAR. And then I just want to show you one more slide, and then we could get into the Q&A here. This is a piece actually I did last year because I was so affected, of course, by the Black Lives Matter movement. And I was asked to kind of contribute to a nonprofit art auction to raise funding for a photo community called San Francisco Camera Works. So I made this really special piece for them. And this is a daguerreotype of a photo history book by Deborah Willis called Reflection in Black, a history of Black photographers, 1840 to the present. And learning about photography, I never learned much about Black photographers. So again, thinking about learning these history again, thinking about all the different sort of decolonizing, the curriculum in ways. So I made a daguerreotype of this book, and as you can see, the picture on the right is how a daguerreotype looks like, because it's really highly reflective, so you can actually see yourself and also participate in this history too. So yeah, why don't I pause here, and then we could maybe jump into Q&A, and if we like, we can go back to some slides. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for that. It is so wonderful to be here with you and to remember and meditate on history. I'm so thrilled that you agreed to be part of this series, and I'm so grateful to be in conversation with you and Chao. Just a quick note I wanted to make is that we're going to be moderating the Q&A portion of our conversation from audience members as well. So if you would like to click the Q&A icon at the very bottom of your screen, you can type in your question and then hit submit anytime during the talk, and then we'll try to get to it at the end here. But I'm going to be selfish and talk a little bit about my question. I want to start out by, first of all, thanking you for that presentation. It was really evocative. I find that your daguerreotypes are so perfectly metaphorical in reflecting some of the experiences of Asian Americans. And in that Yosemite series that you were mentioning, one of the things that I noticed is that you're trying to capture a really big landscape. And even when you're dealing with a very expansive space like that, your works are still very intimately scaled and seductive to me. There's a iridescence to the work that is so appealing. But at the same time, there's something that's disruptive about it. It disrupts the act of looking because, of course, as you mentioned, the works are so much about how photographs are made and how they are understood. So for me, as I'm looking at your work, I'm so aware of the construction of images, and then that then becomes like this reverberating feedback looping quality that I really admire. So all that said, my question is that I'm wondering if you can talk about an aha moment when you started thinking critically about how images are constructed and maybe looking at images that way.
Okay, well, good question. So yeah, I think a lot of the aha moment in my art practice, um, it's really hard to explain, like, where these sort of ideas kind of come from, like even conceptually and process wise. But it's just knowing like the history of things. I usually tell my student, like, the the aha, or the eureka, what do you want to call it, the sort of, when things kind of come together, it's like it comes together in you, and you're there to sort of receive it and do something with it. And it usually comes together through your research and through your interest in the subject matter, right? Interest in the process. Um, and so I have so many aha moments in a way that I feel like I don't even have like a lifetime to complete it, and it usually just comes from just learning about other artists' work, and engaging within histories and research. For example, I know that, with the chlorophyll printing, like, that idea kind of came to me because I knew that, plants were light sensitive. And that's something I learned when I was a kid, right? It's photosynthesis, and I was thinking, well, plants are light sensitive. And I know that when I was a kid, if I leave anything on the lawn, it would ruin the lawn, right? Like, because it'll just block that part of the lawn from sunlight, like a water hose or something, right? So I knew that was always something that is just part of nature. And then, of course, when I was standing in my mother's garden, the most beautiful place to stand, and just that idea kind of came to me. And then the hard part is obviously pursuing it and see if it even works. I think that's the thing, because I think in general, I think ideas do come easy for creative people. That's the reason why we're creative, right? We have the liking, we have an ability to have these ideas. And the challenge is of course doing it and making sure that it actually become something that is physical, something we could share, and use it as an object to form discussion around.
Thank you so much for that, and for emphasizing this idea that the research process is part of your creative process too. Sometimes we think there's just inspiration and then we just done. We just make it. No, and that sort of also emphasizes that, what I'm noticing, which is that your works are very layered and complex. I'm going to have Chow ask the next question, and with your permission, I'm actually going to share the slide that we have a question about.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I thought I was supposed to share a slide. No, I see. Got it. Okay, so this slide here. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, so after looking at the presentation, the last images, so I can kind of curious, what are the last image mean to you personally?
Yeah, so this is a really most of my work, I say art person. I think most artists work in a personal way, or at least the work starts somehow personal. But I always find most of my work is always personal. You know, that it's so still always so connected to some sort of issue of identity, something I'm thinking about. So this is actually a recent image artwork I made, but it's a digital collage of my mother holding my brother and me in the refugee camp. And so this picture here, it's the back, and the picture that it's in the background, the background picture is actually a landmark in Yosemite Valley called Three Brothers. So then this print here is called Two Brothers and a Mother. Sorry, I call it Two Brothers and a Mother. So the thing about this piece is that it's kind of a little bit more complex than just, you know, just the juxtaposition between these two photographs, is that Three Brothers were named, that this landmark was named because it was during the Mariposa War, where the California militia were driving the natives off their land, you know, so basically claiming Yosemite Valley. So they named this landmark because they captured the three brothers of Chief Tenaya. And so then, you know, I also wanted to underscore that, you know, that Yosemite Valley is the history of it is, it's a history of war, you know, and you know, war against native people, indigenous population, as well as Yosemite National Park is considered kind of like the first national park. And it was a national because Abraham Lincoln, during the height of the Civil War, thought that Yosemite, something like Yosemite, could unite the country. So there's also that layer of there, to the layer of the Civil War. So yeah, this is what this piece is about, and just getting people to think about the more complex ideas in a name of a landmark.
Thank you. That was great. I think I also have another questions for you. See, and I saw some of your interview and some of the presentation that you have online. I did watch like 3 videos of you a couple nights ago, and I was fascinated. So I just wondering, when you move, look like you're moving a lot, and as you're moving, you're thinking about a project you're doing. So I want to know how long does the research take, and how do you form relationship with a place?
Yeah, you know, forming relationship with a place is, I think it's all of our responsibility, where we go in this country, where our body moves around. And, you know, when I was living in Virginia, I was thinking about the Civil War. I was thinking about these Confederate flags I encountered out there in Virginia. And of course, you know, coming from California wasn't something I've thought a lot about, you know, and of course, when I get to a place, or even before getting to a place, I start reading up about it, you know. The wonderful thing, because we live in a time where, you know, in the days, I would have to go to like the encyclopedia when I was in high school. But now we have the internet, and we could find so much information. So going to a place, being prepared and knowing a lot about the history there, it's kind of gives me kind of what like a platform to stand on. And I just really encourage everybody to just learn a little bit about the history, where they are, where they're going, because it's so rich, you know. Once you know that, it's so rich, and just makes you really understand, you know, like the complexity of that place.
Yeah, thank you for that response. I mean, I think about that in relationship to how, like, my own personal experiences being very transmigratory, you know. So relationship with places really, um, Yeah, it's thought-provoking. And so that kind of leads me into my next question that I've been waiting to ask you forever. I regard myself as an object maker, and so I'm interested in material culture and the history of things. And since I work with clay, for example, just connecting it back to your response earlier, I think about where the material comes from and like place, the material being connected to a place and how rich that story is. And I see your work is having a strong awareness of that too, whether it's the chlorophyll prints and how, it looks like it's trapping memories in amber, like a bug in amber, right? Or with your daguerreotypes, I also thought about how, as I understand, it's a very archival process. But there's this iridescent quality and just connecting it back to, materials like mercury and silver and copper necessary to produce those works. All this to say that your bodies of work have this really strong physical presence. And yeah, all this reminds me of the way that we use things and we use things to hold on to memory, right? And so I'm wondering if you can address this awareness of thingness that your work seems to have for me.
Yeah, well, definitely. Especially with the daguerreotype, back in the days when it was invented in 1839, it was like an object you hold on to, and you keep put it in your pocket and you could share with people, and it's really physical and it's heavy. And today, we don't think about photography that way. We think about something that's on the screen, it's not even a sheet of paper anymore. So I always thinking about like, objects. I think like there's always that question when people ask you like, if you have to run out of your home, if it's on fire, what you're gonna grab, right? And most people say, oh, they'll grab the family albums, and things like that. And I'm not sure how that is today because people just grab their phone probably. But it's like, that object. And like, when we came to the United States, we didn't bring anything with us. We just brought the clothing that was on our back. And I don't even know in the refugee camp that the clothing went away and we just, got a new clothing. But it was like, we didn't have things, and growing up, I always kind of like, was wondering about like where are our things, where are things of the past, these um, heirlooms that are passed down. We didn't have heirlooms like that. It was so photography for me becomes really object based and thinking about the physicality of the photographic medium. And I always tell my student too, especially my ceramic student, that photography came out of ceramic because it was back in the days when there's a ceramist named Thomas Wedgwood, I guess, who did famous these dinner plates and dinnerwares, and he wanted to increase the production of the design. He wanted to develop something light sensitive where he could put a stencil on it. So it was through that idea of like, chemical base, as people knew that silver nitrate was light sensitive, that's always been known. And that was just the idea that this is like, you could do this thing. And so that was kind of like it launched like all these other people trying to like invent photography, it's I think 1803, when that was first. So yeah, I always give credit to the ceramists, and I do feel that there is a lot of relationship there too, especially when you're like even ascending to like spatial work, casting. There's always like this negative positive kind of thing that comes into play. Same thing as black and white photography. But yeah, I think just to get back to the core of your question, yeah, it's like I want people to look at a photograph and know that they're looking at a photograph, but they don't understand that that's a photograph, right? They see it as a photographic image, but it looks weird because they see themselves and they see the space around them, and then they think about themselves in the present moment. And I think that's the one thing with the daguerreotype process is that you are reminded that you are looking at it too. And then you acknowledge that you're a living being, trying to process this work you're looking at.
Thank you for that response. My mind is kind of swimming. Yeah. Oh, so that process is called decals. And yeah, never knew that it was the origin of photography. I can use that in my ceramics classes. I think this is going to transition like rather nicely into our next question that I prepared for you, which is about the nature of memories. You talked a lot about how it's about memories and the past. And of course, there's a personal stories in there about things you may not remember from when you were 1 years old, as well as how it leads into more of a collective memory. Um, and then that's sort of layered with, or I should say, embedded with geopolitical histories in your work. I wanted to share with you, I already did this, but I saw your works in person in 2015, and just reflecting on how much it sort of affected me in that moment. It was just very personal, my response. And then I'm just noticing my own response to your work today. For example, how my own environmental concerns, as well as the salient anti-Asian sentiments and violence, have really changed the way I'm responding to your work right now. Again, even with your old stuff. And so I'm curious to know how you're reflecting on your own work right now, especially on some of your past work. In other words, does the present moment shift your relationship with your past work, if that makes sense?
That's a really interesting question, and I don't know. I don't think this current moment really shift my past work, because I think in my past work I've always been thinking about things like that, and and I think most Asian American are thinking about things like this before this moment came, but that this moment came in such a really like hurtful way. Because in the past, it was more like, oh, where you're from, and sometimes I still even get that in Yosemite Valley. People ask me if I speak English, and then they ask me for tips on hiking trails, and they realize that I've been here a lot, and I feel really, comfortable being in Yosemite Valley. I don't kind of feel like an outsider. But early on, when I went to Yosemite Valley as someone as an adult age, I did kind of feel like an outsider, because I felt like, well, this is like a sort of like a white space, and you're the way to Yosemite Valley, or any of these sort of like Western parks, like Yellowstones, or Death Valley. There's you travel through these like very sort of conservative community with Trump flags and things like that, and make America great again. Because then you realize, well, this is not your territory, kind of thing. And then you get into the park itself is like passing this this gate where you're on this sort of like federal land, and then you think about the meaning of the Constitution, and you think about the Declaration of Independence, and life and liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, right? Everybody wants to be sort of happy, right? So I think in my work, I'm always thinking about that, and of course, it's the thing that's hurtful now is like that question from like where you're from, it translates now to like you don't belong here, right? You don't belong here, which you've been hearing a lot in this social media sort of posting. So it I at first, I mean, I am still a little wary, kind of sort of like I photograph San Francisco a lot, like I go out in the city and pictures in photograph, but I haven't done that recently, due to, because we're getting with this pandemic too, trying to maintain some sort of social distancing, but also I was worried about the uptick in crimes and things like that. So recently I've been focusing more on just like making work inside like studio wise, and then of course more of like the research, and then going out to the national park where the space is a little bit different than like a city space. And like this one body of work I actually wanted to show you today, if I could take like maybe a minute just to screen share. It's a work that I've been working on for a while, photographing a place called the Lafayette Hillside Memorial, and it's I used the daguerreotype process. Do you see the slide? Right. So I've been photographing this hillside, which started in 2006, and it's a memorial site for soldiers who die in Iraq and Afghanistan, majority American soldiers. And this is the first photo daguerreotype I made, and the signage there is a daguerreotype I forgot to explain is a reverse image, but the signage there is a 5,822 American soldiers has died in 2006 when I made this picture here. And this is a picture I made last weekend. This place is in the Bay Area, 7,975. They actually stopped updating the number, but each of these crosses, you know, families has adopt them and dedicate it to their loved ones who died, you know, in this ongoing war, our longest war pretty much here. And for example, this is in 2012 when I photographed this cross by for James J. Kuhn. And then I was very interested in how the pictures are faded on this cross. And then this is 2013, and you know the cross was updated. And then 2014, you know, the picture faded again. And then this is 2020. You can see that the beret that was on top of the cross is actually fell down. And actually, there's another cross behind that. They just put a new cross over it, but that's the old cross, has the beret down there. So then, you know, thinking about the memories of soldiers and the memories of, you know, the family who for whatever reason, you know, are no longer, you know, updating the crosses too, because it's something, whatever choices they're making. But this place is, you know, I was a couple of years ago, I was at the Lafayette Library and I gave a talk about this work, and I titled my talk "A Protest Against Forgetting." And I was surprised when I came back that summer, somebody put up a cross called "A Protest Against Forgetting." So that's definitely something, you know, I want to think about today, and this Memorial Day is like, you know, that protest to not forget, whatever that history is, to not forget it.
Hey, thank you so much for sharing that, because I think I mentioned that I've been sharing your work with my students. And this past week, actually, I got a lot of responses from them. And their initial responses have been like a very deep emotional response, or yeah, emotional effect that the work brought to them. And I think what is so effective is like what you mentioned about how your work preserves the past, but also like it's a resistance from forgetting. I think like there's a quote by Viet Thanh Nguyen in the book Nothing Ever Dies, Vietnam and the Memory of War, where he writes about the ethics of remembering oneself and others. So that's what resonates for me. I would like to, sorry, we only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to have Chao ask a question, and then we'll probably have to wrap it up. I'm so sorry that, yeah, not managing my time well.
Thank you, amigo. So you mentioned your father TV repair business at part of how you were exposed to the Vietnam and American War through Hollywood's portrait. And looking at the images from Lies magazine, did anything about your experience of revisiting Vietnam change how you approaches the images you want to bring to life in your work?
Well, definitely. I think visiting Vietnam was so eye-opening, because it was, again, you know, Vietnam as a country, you know, it's the country history is also part of it is the history of the Vietnam War. And for me, like, I never imagined like a country full of Vietnamese before. I was just so confused. Like, everyone was speaking Vietnamese, and my Vietnamese skills not that well, you know, but I could still understand. And of course for me, it's like, you know, the country seems to be like, you know, moving forward, and you know, this is part of their past, but their past is very complicated too, like our past is, you know. And they're obviously, the people there are trying to improve themselves, and I find that really amazing. And how this also generation, my generation, who are going back to Vietnam and trying to form more bridges, you know, it's a little bit different than our parents' generation, who are still, in a way, sort of fighting the Vietnam War, you know. And I feel like it's just a very complex situation to be in.
Well, Ben, thank you so much. I just wanted to hop back on to say how wonderful this was, the way you tell your stories and the stories of others through image and material is just so inspiring to me. And I know that this is just, we couldn't have asked for a more appropriate end to the series and the month, and it's just perfectly timed. And so we're so grateful that you could join us. And we'll be posting your website links on our Artist as Storyteller webpage, so that if folks want to get in touch or keep up to date with your work, they can reach out to you. Reach out to you through your website and through all the information on there. And so I want to encourage folks, we have one more event in the Artist as Storyteller season. And so next week on Tuesday, June 8th at 1 p.m., we're holding our final event of the season, and it's we're calling it the Community Showcase. And so we're inviting all South Seattle College students, faculty, and staff, as well as community members, anyone that's tuned in to Artist as Storytellers talks this season, to come together, and we're going to share ideas and reflections on this season's theme and some of the questions and ideas that the artists have presented in their conversations. Because as we, just reflecting back on today's conversation with you, Ben, like, there's so many things that are running through my mind, and I know that the same is true for Amiko and Chow and people that are watching today. And so I'm very excited to have one more event to reflect with all of the student moderators, all of the Artist as Storytellers faculty, moderators, and think back on sort of what has come together in this wonderful series. And so everyone's invited to join us next week. You can visit our website to join the Community Showcase and to also catch up on the amazing conversations that we've had this season. All of the videos are posted from our previous conversations. And so if this is your first event today with Binh Danh, please come check out the other artist conversations, and we'll sort of weave the stories of all of these incredible artists and the work that they're presenting into this community showcase with all of us. And so, Ben, again, thank you so much. This was so wonderful.